What's going on, everyone? Hope everyone is doing well. This is going to be one of 3 masterclasses in which today's video, we're going to be doing a subject to underwriting using the Jericho software. And so if you have your Jericho software, that would be a good time to follow along with me during the underwriting process. And if you don't have a copy, there's a link in the video description below for you to check out. So let's get started. I'm going to minimize myself here on the screen. This should be good enough. And we already have a property here that's been found on PropStream that would make a great candidate for subject to. So I'm going to pull that up now on the screen. And we can see here that the property address is going to be 2710 Runaway over in Atlanta, Georgia. This property is currently listed according to PropStream at $440,000. Days on market 205. It's got a mortgage remaining balance of 402, estimated rate of 5.5%. The principal and interest portion of the monthly payment is $2,335. If you want to find out what the taxes and insurance monthly payment would be, the best way to find out is to just ask for a most recent mortgage statement from the seller. But however, you don't ask that type of information until the seller has accepted your subject to offer presented to them. But we could do an estimate, which I will show you later in this video, of how we can get an estimated PITI. And we can also see here that the loan type is FHA. So what we're going to do now is we're going to now go into the Zillow listing for this property because it is listed on market. And we can already see a major discrepancy for this property. According to Zillow, it's been listed for 10 days. But according to PropStream, it's been listed for 200 days, which tells me that the listing agent has more than likely renewed this listing. And if we go over to the market value section here, I can see here that this property has been listed on February 8th. It is now September 1st is the recording of this video. And so the listing agent has been trying to sell this property for a very long time, and for whatever reason, they're not able to. So let's see what could be a possible issue. Let's look through these property photos. And just based off of first appearance, it looks like everything's in really good condition. I don't see anything wrong with this property at all. It looks like everything's phenomenal. It looks like a great property. I saw that it was built in 2022. So no issues with the property itself. Let's look at the location. Let's go over to the satellite view. We can see here that the property's sitting in a cul-de-sac. And so that might be one reason why this property is not getting that many eyes. It's not in a desirable location. So I'm going to go back into the Zillow listing here. And then another idea that comes to mind is the PITI might simply just be too high for this property. If you were to get a loan at today's rates at 6.5%, which is the prime rate as of September 1st for a 30-year fixed mortgage, 6.5% P&I at a $400,000 loan, it's going to be pretty high just for the principal and interest, not including taxes and insurance. So that's probably the other reason why this property is not selling. So unfortunately, this is going to be very common moving forward for the remainder of the year for 2024 and moving into 2025. Subject twos are going to become very popular, especially if these interest rates continue to stay stagnant and they don't come down. And if inflation continues to keep going up, more and more properties are going to be sitting on the MLS just like this one, even though the listing agent has you to believe that it's only been listed for 10 days, which is not true. We can see here that they've been trying to sell this for quite some time, according to the last sales price history for this property. Now, while we're down here, I want to show you that there's an easy way to figure out what the PITI is for this property. Now, remember, this is going to be an estimate for the PITI. The best way to find out what the actual PITI is for this property is to ask for a recent mortgage statement from the seller, but you would only do so once they have accepted your subject to offer. So let's go back into PropStream. We can see here that the P&I, according to PropStream, is $2,335. We're going to bring up our calculator onto the screen, and we're going to write that, 2335, and then we're going to go to Zillow. And on Zillow here, we're going to add the monthly payment for the escrow. Escrow would be taxes and insurance. So we're going to add 434 plus the HOA, because it's in a HOA community. And we can see here that an approximate estimate would be about $2,800 a month. Now, this is an approximate. Now, let's take a look at what the rental estimate here is. The rental estimate is $2,940 a month. Now, because inflation is on the rise, and this property's been sitting for a very long time, if I were the landlord for this property, I would probably have this rented out for $2,800 a month because I do not want to be sitting vacant for 30-something days or longer, knowing that I'm going to have an approximate PITI of $2,800. And just based off of this rental estimate, I already know that I'm not going to cash flow on this particular property. So this property has no equity and it has little to no cash flow. If I were going to rent this, I'd probably rent this at $2,800. The PITI estimate here is also $2,800. So there's not going to be any cash flow in this property, and it's listed at $420. The estimated loan balance is $402. So there's no equity on this property. So what are the benefits of this property? Well, it looks like it's turnkey, so that's a benefit. And the interest rate is at 5.5%, which is below the prime rate as of September 1st, 2024. The prime rate for a 30-year fixed loan is hovering at around 6.5 to 7%, depending on your credit score and your DTI. And so there's a benefit with that. So brand new property, moderately low interest rate. If we could get into this property at 10% down, this might be a really good opportunity for the future to have as a buy and hold, knowing that eventually the property values will go up, rental values will go up. So it's not going to cash flow at the moment, but it seems like a pretty good opportunity for an investor, knowing that the future is always optimistic. And so we also have an additional benefit here being that it is a 4-bed. So I could do some kind of pad split, or I could do some kind of rent per room. That way I can generate some cash flow. We could also do a wraparound mortgage on this property as well. But if we just keep things basic, I just do a traditional LTR. I don't mind, and I'm not going to cash flow on this one. It'll cash flow later in the future. So with that being said, let's go into our Jericho software, and we're going to start now inputting this data that we are aware of, and we're going to create an incentive for the seller off of our underwriting to accept the subject to offer. How do we create an incentive for the seller to accept a subject to offer? Well, you need to create a compare and contrast. And the compare and contrast offer would be cash, something that is very conventional and that all sellers are aware of. Sellers are aware of what a cash offer is. So we're going to create a cash offer knowing that this has low equity. And so our cash offer is going to be low enough, but also high enough that the seller now has to come to closing with, let's say, $20,000. So we're going to underwrite that cash offer, knowing and wanting the seller to be aware that if they receive the cash offer, they're going to have to come to closing with $20,000. And then we'll do a compare and contrast to the subject to, where they're then going to net actual cash at closing if they accept the subject to offer. Now, before we do that, one thing to notice here is that the Zillow estimate says that it's 414. Whenever you are looking at estimates for properties, keep in mind the days on market. The longer this property sits on market, the less value this property is going to have. And I say that's a pretty good rule of thumb, because if you are listed on one of the major MLS websites such as Zillow, and if the listing agent cannot sell this property within 200-something days, they might be doing a terrible job, or the market conditions are indicating that this property is just overpriced. And in today's market, it's probably overpriced. And so we're going to make an assumption now that the true market value is probably going to be well below the $400K on this property, knowing that it's been listed for such a long time. And I'm going to estimate that the market value is probably going to be around $385. And I'm saying $385 because I think $385 would be the sweet spot, knowing that the interest rates are at between 6.5% and 7% for prime rates on a 30-year fixed loan. I think the $385 sales price on this property would get a lot more attention, and that would probably be the number that they need to actually sell this property, would be $385. So I'm going to say that that's going to be the market value. Again, if you want to find out what the true market value is, you're going to have to comp out the property. We are doing a subject to offer, not knowing whether or not they're going to accept our offer. So we're not going to waste time up front doing comps. Anytime you're doing manual underwriting for a cash or creative offer, we are not going to waste 10 minutes of our time comping out a property if we don't even have a yes or a no, or some kind of motivation, some kind of incentive from the seller saying, yes, we're willing to accept a cash offer. Yes, we're willing to accept a creative offer. Only then will you take the time necessary to comp out the property. But in this case, since we're just going to submit an LOI to that property, there's no need for us to go out of our way to do comping on this if they might not even agree to a subject to offer. So we would do the comps mostly during the final underwriting process once we have an agreement from the seller stating, yes, I'm interested in moving forward in cash. Yes, I'm interested in moving forward with creative. That is when you would be more detailed with your underwriting and take the time necessary to comp out the property and to look at the mortgage payment and make sure that the property is able to cash flow, make sure there's no arrears with the property. That is the time that you do a final underwriting on the property. So I digress. We're going to move forward. We're going to say the market value is going to be $385 for this property, and that the market rent value is probably going to be around $2,800. So I'm going to move myself here on the screen. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to update this to $2,800. That's going to be our rental value. And so that's going to be in column K, row 4 of the Jericho software. This rental value is not necessarily needed for our subject to underwriting. However, because we have a stress test incorporated into the Jericho software, I want to have an approximate estimate of what my potential cash flow might be according to a $2,800 rental value. And I want to have an approximate cash on cash percentage as well. So that's going to be our stress test for the Jericho software. I'll minimize myself just a little bit more here on the screen. We have a market value of $385. It was already inputted at $385. It must have been from a different property. We're going to keep it at the $385 mark. And we want to start creating an incentive for the seller that if they receive a cash offer from us, that they have to come to closing with $20,000. $20,000 is just an estimate. You can pick any arbitrary number that you want. I think between $15,000 and $20,000 is a good enough incentive for the seller to kind of reconsider the second offer, the second option, which would be subject to. If a seller needs to write a check for this amount of money, $15,000, $20,000, they're going to think twice. And they're going to think, well, tell me more about this subject to offer. That is why we're doing a compare and contrast. So is the cash offer real? It might be if you're working with a hedge fund, but this is going to be for visualization purposes. And we're going to provide this table automatically to the seller, which that table is provided to you on the subject to template LOI from the Jericho software. So these numbers will get auto-populated with all the inputs for cash and creative finance. And so when they receive this LOI from you as the wholesaler, as the investor, they're going to have a conversation and they're going to realize, well, if I take the cash offer, I'm going to have to come to closing with a paycheck. But if I accept the subject to offer, now I'm going to actually net some money. So that is the reason why we have a conventional versus creative table. It's to provide a visual and it's to provide a compare and contrast. So let's go back into the cash versus creative tab. Now, I need to adjust the cash offer percentage so that the closing amount here is going to be roughly $15,000 to $20,000. So we have a current market value of $385. I'm going to adjust the cash offer to 95% of the market value. So what does that mean? It means the market value is $385. If I gave the seller 95% market value on cash, that means they're going to be getting a cash offer from me at $365. That's how that number is being generated. So you would simply click on column A, row 5, and you can adjust the numerical percentage here. And so I can see here that even at 95% cash value for this property, they're going to have to come to closing at $50,000. They have it currently listed at $420, but it's not worth $420. The seller and the agent both know that there's going to be commissions involved, miscellaneous closing fees. They would be lucky if they walk away with a couple $1,000s at closing. So they have it listed above market value. They have it listed above the loan amount because the seller is trying to cover the difference of expenses for the sale of the property. But it's not worth $420. It's well below the $400K for this particular property. I'm going to see what a 99% cash value would look like. That's still not enough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust this to, let's say, 103 at 103% market value, which means 3% over market value. They would have to come to closing with $20,000. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. I think that's going to be a good enough incentive that if the seller sees $396,000 on cash, if they say no to this, they're completely not understanding the market conditions, and they're not understanding that 103% market value on cash is completely unheard of. So a $396 cash offer on this property would be phenomenal, but they're more than likely not going to accept it, knowing that they're going to have to come to closing with $20,000. So that is how the math is being incorporated. If we take a look at the sales fee here, we can see here that the sales fee is 4%. Why is the sales fee 4%? Well, we're going to be looking at the best case scenarios always for conventional and creative, especially on the conventional side with underwriting. What is the best case scenario for conventional? Best case scenario would be about 2.5% to 3% commissions fee for the listing agent, 0% for the buyer's agent, and 1% towards closing costs. That is best case scenario for sales fee. So we take a 3% sales fee for the realtor commission on the listing side and a 1% towards closing costs. That is how the sales fee is being added. So we have a 4% total sales fee on the property. That is the best case scenario. But typically sales fees are going to range anywhere between 6 to 8%, sometimes 10%, depending on the location of the property and which state you're in. But if we just look at best case scenario, if our creative offer can beat the mathematics for a best case scenario for conventional, then we are truly incentivizing the seller and saying, hey, even under a best case scenario for cash or other conventional methods, our creative offer is still going to outcompete, out underwrite, and you would net more money. So that is why we're looking at best case scenario. So $20,000 is what the seller has to come to closing with at a $396,000 cash offer. We're going to leave column B alone. This is done. Now we're going to take a look at the creative side. Now remember, on the creative transactions, whenever you're dealing with subject to transactions especially, the sales price needs to be at or greater than the total estimated loan balance of the property. If we recall from PropStream said that the estimated loan balance was $402,000. So when we write up a PSA, we want the PSA sales price to be at or greater than the estimated loan balance. It's going to smooth line the process when you're dealing with closing attorneys or closing title companies. Don't have the sales price below the total encumbrance of the property because you're going to create issues at closing. Have your sales price at or greater than the total encumbrance, knowing that we are not coming into this transaction with $396,000 cash. We're coming into this transaction with a down payment to the seller, and that down payment will typically be between 8 and 12% of whatever the sales price is for the property. So we're coming into this property with a lot less cash than a conventional offer. So the sales price doesn't mean anything to us as an investor. So we need to now adjust the higher purchase price so that it is above the total encumbrance of the property. So I'm going to adjust this to $405,000. So let's put in $25,000 over the current market value. And we're actually going to come down just ever so slightly to $20,000. So $405,000, I think, would be a perfect sales price for this property on creative terms. And so we can see here that column G, row 3 of the Jericho software, in this particular cell, this cell is going to tell you as the underwriter, how much are you willing to overpay for the property. In this case, we're willing to pay over $20,000 over the market value. If we pay $20,000 over the market value, then the sales price is going to be $405,000. That's how the math is being done. But the sales price doesn't mean anything to us under subject to. What matters to us is the total entry fee for the property. So if I gave the seller $40,000 down, that would be 10%, 10.39% of the current market value. You can click on this cell here on your spreadsheet, and you'll see the mathematical input values there, the formula. And you can see here that $40,000, that's going to be a little bit steep. I don't think I want to give 10.39% to the seller, knowing that this property does not cash flow. It might be in great condition, doesn't cash flow though, and it's already upside down on equity. So I'm going to come back down to $30,000, which is where it was originally. It must have been from a different underwriting process for a separate property. But I think the $30,000 mark is a good enough starting point. And if we need to have a follow-up conversation with the seller, then we can always go up with our down payment. So the rule of thumb in real estate transactions, especially in creative, you can always go up with your underwriting, you can always go up on your offer, but you can never come back down. And, it's somewhat true. I have the experience of always renegotiating my offers to coming down on the sales price, but it is a lot more difficult to come down on the sales price. Typically, when you're dealing with a retail seller, once you tell them an offer, let's say it's $400,000, they expect you to come in at $400,000. If you have to have a conversation with the retail seller and you tell them now we can only pay you $380,000, they're going to be pissed off at you, and they may not want to do business with you, especially if you are an investor or wholesaler. So you have to be very careful when you're having these conversations with sellers. try to do your underwriting process as accurately and as smoothly as possible, because you can always go up on your numbers, but it can be challenging to come back down, because having that conversation with the seller is not going to be pleasant. And so we're going to stay at the $30,000 down payment to the seller. I think that's going to be good enough. And we can see here now that the seller is going to receive $14,000, a little over $14,000, $14,600 at closing if they accept a subject to offer, which means that they're going to get a non-refundable down payment from the investor for $30,000. The total cost associated with the property is going to be $15,000, and that means they're going to have a net of almost $15,000, just to make the numbers more simple, almost $15,000 at closing. So that's a huge difference between creative and cash. Seller can make $15,000 at closing with a subject to offer, or that they can come to closing with $20,000. And that $20,000 at closing is based off of $396,000 of cash being paid for the property, and they still have to come to closing with $20,000. So you could see that there's a lot of power in creative finance, and if you could provide this visual to the seller, it's going to go a long way in incentivizing them why they should take your creative offer as opposed to a conventional offer. Now, something to mention here is you might have noticed that the sales fee for creative is 3.8%. Why is the sales fee here at 3.8% and not 4%? Well, it's 3% towards the listing agent commission, which is going to be pretty standard. Sometimes it's 2.5%, sometimes it's 5%. We don't really know as the underwriter. We're going to make an assumption that the average listing fee is going to be 3%, so that's why it's staying at 3%. If the listing agent commission happens to be more or less, you would adjust your underwriting as necessary. But you're not going to know that agent commission unless you actually have a conversation with them, or they tell you in the MLS description. Perhaps it'll tell you what the agent commission is, or you have that follow-up phone call with them and ask them politely, by the way, what is your agent commission? Is it 5%? Is it 4%? Is it 3%? We don't know. But we're going to say that it's 3% because that's pretty standard. The 0.8%, most creative finance transactions will always be cheaper with the creative finance transactions. And from my experience as an underwriter, it's usually about 0.8%. That's a pretty solid average, 0.8% for miscellaneous closing costs for a creative finance transaction. So it'll be slightly cheaper than a standard conventional sale. So not significantly cheaper, but slightly cheaper. And so that will help a little bit in terms of more money being netted from the seller's side. Now, if you are assigning the deal, this is where you would include your input variables. So maybe we'll do a $15,000 assignment fee if you plan on assigning the deal. If I move myself over here to the left-hand side, I can see now that I have an estimated deal projection, and it looks like I'm going to have an estimated deal entry of about 12.54%. The 12.54% is including the assignment fee, the down payment, plus miscellaneous closing costs for the property. So an investor is going to be really coming into this deal with roughly $50,000, which is going to be about 12.5% entry. Now, that's going to be too high. And in order for this to make any sense, because the interest rate's sitting at 5.5%, I would say that this property really needs to have a total entry of about 10%. So this is going to be your estimate. If this is closer to 10% and you are assigning the deal, you're going to be able to move this property a lot better. So let's adjust the assignment fee maybe back down to $10,000 just to see what it would be. So that's still too high. Let's go to $8,000 assignment fee. Okay, we can leave it at $8,000. So you would have an $8,000 assignment fee. The reason being is because $30,000 is going to the seller. You as the wholesaler would get $8,000 for this property. That would be total entry of $38,000 for the money to the seller plus your assignment fee. That's $38,000. You're still technically below the 10%, right? Because higher purchase price is $405. So you would be at $38,000, even though the purchase price is going to be $405. However, you're not accounting for closing costs. I mean, not closing costs. You're not accounting for holding costs. And so this entry percentage here is accounting for holding costs. And it's going to be an approximation. So I'd say if you are a wholesaler and you decide to wholesale on this property, your assignment fee on this one would probably be closer to $8,000. Maybe you could get a $10,000 assignment fee. And so we can see here that our cash flow after expenses, again, it's a stress test and it's an approximation. We won't know until we actually have a recent mortgage statement from the property. But it looks like we might cash flow $358 according to the stress test here. But we are going to have to verify that through the mortgage statement. So that takes care of the subject to underwriting, and this is going to be specifically for the Jericho software. And so if we go over to the subject to LOI, we can now see that if we click on manual underwriting, these values now have adjusted on the LOI template. So we have our cash offer of $396, and we have a creative purchase price of $405. And so all these numerical values have been inputted for you. The blank space here that is provided for you on the LOI template, this is for your customized use. You can fill that out how any way you want to make it more of a personal offer that the seller would receive from you as a wholesaler or investor. But this is what they would be receiving. And so if I click on the print button here from Excel, this is exactly what they would be receiving. And so this would be page 1 of the LOI, that would be page 2, page 3, and then if you have any type of credibility that you want to provide to the seller, that would be page 4. And so that LOI template that is shown here on your screen, this would then be converted into a PDF. And so it would look something like this. So if we just pull up a couple of PDFs that I already have saved from the Jericho software, we can click on this one, for example. And so you're going to have a professional looking PDF that the seller is going to receive from you in an email blast. And so this is what they would be receiving. These are the numerics for our subject to offer, but we can make it so we'll click the delete button and we'll actually do that now. We're going to click on the convert text to PDF. And so it's going to create that professional PDF for you. If we go into our folder path, now this PDF has been updated with the numerical values for our subject to transaction, as you can see here on your screen. So this is all being done for you in an automated way. And now that the LOI has been created for you, you have the option to manually send out this email immediately. You have the option to manually send out the PDF immediately via email using the send email macro here shown on your screen. Or you can wait until, let's say, perhaps the end of the day, or maybe you've done 3 or 4 different underwritings, and then you can blast out those emails along with all the other letter of intent. So you'll have 2 options here that you can do. You can either send out that PDF immediately via email now using the macro shown here on the subject to tab, or you can wait until you've done a couple of other manual underwriting and just send everything out together at once using the blast email feature. So you'll have 2 ways to do that. For the calculation for the subject to underwriting, we are done. There's nothing more that needs to be done for the subject to. So you can see here that it was pretty straightforward. Just a couple of miscellaneous items that you need to be aware of, as we had discussed. And now this should give you a pretty good idea of how to pursue a subject to underwriting with the seller. So we always want to incentivize the seller with the creative option and never with the cash. The only time that a cash offer would be suitable is with a seller finance where there's no encumbrance associated with the property. That would be the most likely scenario, that a cash offer would be movable as a wholesaler. Or you could also give a cash offer for your hybrid transactions. Just make sure that your cash offer on the hybrid transactions has enough equity still for a flipper. But we'll talk about that in a separate masterclass. Today's masterclass for underwriting was specifically for subject to. The Jericho software does pretty much everything for you, from subject to seller finance to hybrid underwriting. You can then, create professional looking LOIs, send them out immediately once the underwriting and LOI has been completed, or you can wait until the end of the day and blast out those emails as a group emails with other LOIs that you have created. And so we are done. This was the subject to masterclass using the Jericho software. In the next video, we're going to cover our seller finance portion. And under the seller finance masterclass, we're going to be going in depth into the seller finance calculator, as well as briefly look into the reverse seller finance option. Super excited to show you that as well. So thank you for watching. Hope this video was helpful. And if you have any questions at all, please leave it in the comments section of the video here. So thank you. Have a great day, and I'll see you on the next video.